Welcome back to Aaradhna. Last week, Mr. Sunder Rajan talked about the meaning of the sound Om and briefly upon its relationship to Buddhism. This week, he delves a bit deeper into this relationship and looks at the bonds between these two great religious traditions, Hinduism and Buddhism. Our interview is conducted by Mr. Anand Atal.
Sunder Rajan, namaskar. I'd like to welcome you to Aaradhna program. In this interview, I would like to discuss with you a look at Buddhism from a Hindu perspective. It is because this is one perspective which you don't read very much about. Buddhism is a worldwide religion which originated in South Asia, but I think there is a history associated with it. And today I want to discuss with you how Buddhism is looked at by Hindus. As you know, one of the interviews you talked about darshanas. Darshanas are the analysis or discussions on different aspects of Hinduism. And one of the darshanas, at one time in the interview, you said, does deal with Buddhism. Could you go back to that again?
Okay. Once again, Pranamji, and thanks again for welcoming me back. And talking about Buddhism in respect to Hinduism is very interesting because there have been debates that are going back and forth. And Buddhism, as we call it in the West, is not Buddhism according to a Hindu. It's called Bauddha. Bauddha is the viewpoint of Buddha. Hinduism or Sanatana Dharma had multiple viewpoints, and somebody rightly called it the nation of philosophers because everybody was so obsessed with philosophy and debates were going back and forth. We have talked about the 6 major darshanas, which is Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Sankhya, Yoga, Mimamsa and Vedanta. So these 6 base that Veda is an authority. And there are 3 other major darshanas or viewpoints which do not take Veda as an authority. They are Jaina, Bauddha and a materialism called Charvaka, which says after you die then there's nothing else that remains. But you've already covered in your previous interview about Jainism. Bauddha came into being somewhere around the 4th or 5th century BC by a prince called Siddhartha. Siddhartha later on became Gautama Buddha, and he was born in what is now Bihar and in a forest called Lumbini. It came at a time when the Upanishads were already written and there was so much confusion in India about the nitty-gritties and the logics, and it was hair-splitting debates about the origin of the universe, the dissolution of the universe. At one point I heard there were about 63 different thoughts or schools of thoughts that were talking about how the universe originated, and about at least 4 major thoughts about how the universe is going to end.
And they all made Vedas their reference point?
They all made one of the 6 major schools as a reference point, either Nyaya or Vaisheshika, logics and epistemology. But not all of them had talked about the Vedas as an authority. Everybody in a street corner would start talking about their own philosophy, and the winner would be gathering their own disciples. At this point, Buddha, let me go into a very brief history. Buddha as a prince was exposed to be or was supposed to be a king, and his father feared that he would become a great monk. So,
in fact, there was a prediction that either he will be a great monk or he will be a great king.
Right, a great teacher actually. And he was exposed to all kind of material pleasures, and when he became the king, he observed 4 things that made him leave everything and become a monk. First one was he saw a person who was old. Old age he had never seen before. He had seen a person who had sores on his body, he was ill. And third, he saw a dead person. And he said, is this how everybody's life is going to end? You might be the greatest achiever on earth. One earthquake, you just become statistics. 23 people dead or 2,000 people dead. All your achievements will just be buried there. And finally, he saw a recluse or an yogi who was very peaceful. And he left his kingdom, his wife and his son, and went and tried different methods of how to get rid of the suffering. And he tried it for about 6 years or so. He left his home at 29. At 35, suddenly one day he finally found peace under a Bodhi tree. So he came up with something called the Four Noble Truths. Suffering exists. There is a cause of suffering. Suffering can be eliminated, and there is a way to eliminate suffering.
Very simple but very highly effective
Yes.
wisdom. Yes.
And Bauddha, during his time, it was spread only within a certain small locality. And it was Ashoka, the grandson of Chandragupta Maurya, who actually he was spearheading it, and he became a convert himself. And then spread Bauddha to Sri Lanka and as far as even Afghanistan or present day Afghanistan. And he was instrumental in actually spreading Buddhism all through India. And after that, there were lots of debates between the Brahmanas or the Vaidikas, people who were rigidly supporting the Veda, and the school of Buddhist thoughts or Bauddha. Because Bauddhas were actually refuting or they were saying that Vedas are not valid.
So you are talking about two opposing viewpoints which existed in that time in India.
It is the same viewpoint in different terminologies. That's how I see it now. One says Veda is true, the other says Vedas are not. And one says that there is a soul, there is a supreme, the other doesn't give validity to it. So Buddha never talked about God. Whenever somebody talks about God, he would say that doesn't fit the case, and he would be silent about it.
Is it true, I would like your comment on, as some people indicate that Buddhism was a reform movement of Hinduism. Do you agree with that? And what is your thought on it?
I definitely agree that there was some reform after Buddhism came into the picture, positively and otherwise, but mostly positive. Due to Jainism and Buddhism, one thing is most people converted to vegetarianism. So most Brahmins used to eat meat before that, or I would assume so. But after that, there was ahimsa, which was already spoken of in the Bhagavad Gita, which became even more stronger. But on the contrary, there were also many schools of thoughts and ideological warfare, not physical warfare, debates and discussions that led to a lot of lots of division between the society, I would say that. The reason is, religion is meant to unify the society, not divide it. And that is the reason when I read Buddhism, I see lots of commonality rather than differences between Hinduism and Buddhism. Especially the mention of Indra, Devas, Gandharvas. And when you read the Dhammapada, Buddha's teachings, the last chapter is called the Brahmana Varga. Brahmana is a Hindu word, you would agree.
Yes.
And when he talks about the Brahmana Varga, he outlines exactly how a Brahman should be. When I say Brahman here, it means a person, an enlightened person. So he says a person who doesn't like or dislike, who doesn't harm others and fully is in self-control is a Brahmana. That's exactly what the Bhagavad Gita also teaches.
Well, it doesn't surprise me because Buddha, he was born as a Hindu, he was raised as a Hindu till he decided to go for his enlightenment. So a lot of his cosmology was based on Hinduism probably.
Most of the thoughts, yes. And even now you can see that there are god and goddesses like Kurukulla or Avalokiteshvara. And initially Buddha never talked about god or goddesses. But now when you look at Buddhism or some schools of it, they do talk about Sukhavati, the heaven, or they also talk about different grades and gradations in which you have to be before you become a Buddha.
So how is it, when did Buddhism not spread in India? I know it spread for several hundred years after his death, and especially because of Emperor Ashoka. When did it cease to spread or become a major religion within India?
Well, it always was, and it always was within India till about the 12th century. But one important thing I would say before that, because we are just jumping in history, is around 500 AD, there was a stalwart called Bodhidharma. He was from South Asia, South India, from a place called Kanchipuram. He was the 28th patriarch of Indian Buddhism, and he took Buddhism to China and spread it there. And he was the first patriarch of Zen Buddhism in China. The sixth one is one of my favorite. He's called Huineng. He wrote something called the Platform Sutra. But anyway, coming back, after that there were lots of debates. And in the between the 10th and 12th centuries, there was Islamic invasion on India. And during which, because of the Varnashrama Dharma or because of whatever it is, Hinduism survived or fought back. And because of the teachings of Ahimsa, I hope so, or I think so, Buddhism was routed out. There was a huge university called the Nalanda in Bihar. And that was destroyed by the invasion. And after that, Buddhism never actually recuperated from that.
It had a huge library, several million books.
Exactly.
And you had thousands and thousands of people who came there to study as monks.
Right. And you should talk to a Buddhist on the show to actually get the right picture of Nalanda and what happened to it after.
So as a result of this invasion, the Nalanda University was destroyed. And how did it affect the spread of Buddhism in India?
Once the monks were killed and the university was destroyed, the Sangha was destroyed. Sangha is the social order or where the monks are. The social order, that's what I would call it. And after that, there was nobody spreading Buddhism. And it became much more difficult. But luckily, it survived outside of India, in Sri Lanka, in Tibet, and in Burma and all.
So, Sunder, what are some of the commonalities and essential differences between Buddhism as you see it now and as it is prevalent in the world today?
Well, the commonalities are easy to outline because as I have seen it, it's always about commonalities. It's not syncretism, it is just commonalities. Hinduism and Buddhism had evolved from the same bowl of spiritual thought, and each one branched off in a different way. So, the commonalities is the pattern of thinking between the two and the basic question to end suffering in their own way. But the different schools of Buddhism, mainly the one of Nagarjuna, who came around the 2nd century AD, was Mula Madhyamika, which is the middle way, because Buddhism had 3 major schools or 4 major schools.
Even at that time?
After Buddha, yes. One is the realism, one is the idealism, and one is the middle way. So, the idealism says, or let me start with the realism. Realists say that everything is real. The external objects as well as what is thought in the mind is indeed real and concrete. While the ideals say everything what you see outside is an illusion and what alone is in the mind is real. While the Shunyavada of Nagarjuna, which is also called Mula Madhyamaka,
the middle path.
The middle path. It put forth saying that nothing is real, even the mind or external, and everything is transient. Shunya literally means zero. So it means it doesn't say nothing exists, it says nothing exists as you perceive it. But all schools of Buddhism do agree in one point, that nothing is permanent. To quote this or to prove this, they quote 2 examples. One is a candle and second is a stream. You say the candle is burning constantly and steadily, yet the flame that's going up, it's not constant. It's very fast, it's just burning itself up very fast, and yet you see the continuity. And the same way a stream flowing, you see a flowing stream, but the water is already gone. The same way every moment or every instant is a separate snapshot. So that is the Buddhist way.
So the Zen Buddhism, which is very rapidly getting popularized, it is something evolved from Nagarjuna's middle Buddhism. Is it remnant of the Shunya Buddhism?
Yes, it is, because the middle way belongs to a school called the Mahayana, and Bodhidharma actually spread that flavor to China. And you would be interested to know that Zen, the etymology comes from Chinese Chan. I hope I'm pronouncing it right, but Chan, which indeed comes from the Sanskrit root dhyana. So dhyana becomes Chan, and that becomes Zen. So in spite of all that, the commonality is in the approach that there is something beyond just the material world, and by achieving it, you get rid of all the pain that there is.
So, what are now the essential respects in which they diverge, these two great religions, as they are practiced today?
Right. One is the nirvana that we talked about in the commonalities, the nirvana, the bondage, the what do you call it? Escape from bondage is nirvana.
Mukti we refer to as, yes.
Literally, it's putting out the light. But the differences, the major differences, as we outlined, is one, validity of the Vedas. Hindus believe that the Vedas are pramana. That's why they are called Vaidikas. The word Hindu was never used. It is always Vaidika. And Buddhists do not believe in that. And the second major point is the concept of Atman or Brahman.
Or soul and
Interestingly, the zero or the Shunya school, Shunyavada, it says everything is zero, and Hinduism says everything is not everything. There is infinity. So one talks about zero, one talks about infinity. Purnata and Shunyata. Terminologies may vary as long as you are in the relative world, but only a person who has experienced it has the right to comment which one is true and which one is not.
Well, Sunder Rajan, this is quite interesting. I think you have given us a glimpse of Buddhism in this program, and maybe we will have a deeper look either through some Buddhist speaker or maybe with you some other time. I thank you very much for this interview, and namaskar.
Pranam ji.